All right. Good morning, everybody. This is a public meeting of the Indiana Arts Commission On-Ramp Fellowship 2019 Advisory Review Panel for the Visual Arts. I am Brett Roberts, IAC staff. Today is July 15th, and we are meeting by conference call and streaming live from a webinar. We welcome applicants who may be listening in today and would like to remind you that you are muted for this review. There is no direct contact or conversation about the evaluation and disposition of applications before, during, or after the panel meeting. At this time, we would like the panelists and staff to introduce themselves, stating their name, occupation, and where they are from in the state. We'll start with Lauren Pacheco.
Hi, my name is Lauren Pacheco, currently living in Gary, Indiana, and I'm the Director of Arts Programming and Engagement at Indiana University Northwest.
Thank you. LaShonda Crow-Storm.
I'm LaShonda Crow-Storm, currently residing in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am the Community Engagement Director for Spirit in Place, as well as a social practice community-based artist.
Julie Hill.
I'm Julie Hill. I live in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm the Life Enrichment Director at Beltrace Senior Living Community. I'm a painter and I'm an arts and aging consultant.
Next up, we have Matt McClure.
I'm Matt McClure. I'm the Executive Director of ArtLink in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'm also an author, illustrator, and the co-founder with some other great people of ArtLink's 212 Incubator Program.
And Anna Tragasser.
Yep, Anna Tragasser, IAC staff.
All right. Panelists Ramiro Rodriguez, as well as Maria, were unable to participate in today's discussion. On applications where they are listed as first reader, the second reader will serve as first reader instead, and where they are listed as second reader, we will open up to the full panel for discussion. This panel is structured to give feedback that will help the applicant strengthen their fellowship project to advance their careers. The discussion will also help IAC staff identify any important modifications that applicants may be required to make to their fellowship project before moving forward. Now we'll begin the panel review. This is how the process will work. I will announce the application we will review and ask the first reader to begin the discussion. The first reader will provide advice to strengthen the fellowship project, focusing on the evaluation criteria from their perspective. Panelists, please note that the applications do not need to be recapped since everyone has read it. Just provide your comments. After the first reader is finished, I will ask the second reader to present any new, additional, or opposing comments. We are not looking for consensus. We want the applicant to receive excellent advice from the different perspectives panelists bring to the table. After the second reader has finished, I will open the discussion for final comments. Remember, in the interest of time, we are only looking for new, additional, or opposing viewpoints. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, that panelist will be placed on hold while the application is reviewed. Finally, once the application has been reviewed by the full panel, we will ask the panel to update their comments in the online system. It is common for recommendations to change as a result of this broader conversation. These changes save automatically. If for whatever reason that takes a little extra time, please just give me a signal and we can give you as much time as you need. Are there any questions about this process before we begin? All right, let's begin then. We'll start with the first application from Alicia Criswell, and the first reader is Matt.
Thank you. This was excellent. Some really great goals here. My feedback is really in line with the fact that there are potentially conflicting goals here. The applicant talks about their own work, having more time to create their own work, while also wishing to pursue this really wonderful new art therapy style. I thought both of those are very well presented. The applicant articulated these very well, but as part of this application, it seems to be one needs to be before the other, and one needs to be the focus. So it almost seems as if the applicant put in two projects, so to speak, in one application, and I think it could really benefit from focusing on one or the other. The other big thing is that the applicant put in under the feasibility, put in a great deal of information, and really being able to streamline much of this and break it down into some more tangible, I think would be much more effective. And again, that comes back to focusing on the or I should say hyper focusing on the single goal as opposed to a multi-goal standpoint. So that's my primary primary feedback.
Thank you, Matt. Our second reader on this first application is Julie Hill.
I concur with Matt with the thought that it was a little bit over, a lot on a plate to try to tackle. And with the $2,000 funding, it could easily just go towards the educational process and a workshop or the development of personal artists. But I thought it was too much to try to take in. But really appreciate the work that Alicia is trying to do here.
Thank you, Julie. We're now going to open it up to any new, additional, or opposing comments from the entire panel.
Hold on.
All right.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. LaShonda here. I agree with both, but I think my perspective was more less just about the projects, but more about what were the necessary skills for her to be able to accomplish them, especially when she thinks about the community work. That there, to me, seemed a need to be able to do additional work, like looking at other models of how have people used arts, especially when you're doing work that in many ways is grounded in trauma. So I know I listed some publications and things that she could look at, like trauma-informed community building, because as she starts to move this work out of the studio into community spaces, there's just other things that start to happen with that. And doing a little work around community development, community organizing, trauma-informed work will help that work stick better as it evolves over time. And I'd really like her to push beyond trying to work in traditional art spaces like museums and galleries, especially for this type of work. Just from my own experience, unfortunately, those spaces are oftentimes not necessarily as embedded in community in the way in what she's described in terms of the populations that she would like to work with. So really trying to connect with after-school programs like the YMCA, YS, Boys and Girls Club, community centers, senior programs might be better ways as she's thinking about how to do this workshop, where she needs to build those particular type of relationships, so that what is created is something that has legs and actually can stick beyond the traditional art world.
Awesome. That was good. Thank you. Any new or additional or opposing comments on this application from anybody else in the panel?
Real quick, this is Matt again, just to follow up. I completely agree with you on the looking at others who have done this. And I do recommend as well, there's a comment I put in my feedback. There's some other organizations around the country that do similar things. And so doing some research and seeing other models that might work really well for this and really meet the long-term community needs as well as personal goals, I think would be really beneficial.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Any last new, additional, or opposing comments on Alicia Criswell's application? All right. please finalize your comments in the online system for this application. Let me know if you need additional time. At this time, you could also pull up Andrea Light's application, which is the next one on our review process this morning. All right. If no one needs more time, we'll start with Andrea Light's application. So Chandra, you are the first reader.
Me just a second so I can read my comments again.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Take your time.
Okay, I know one of the things that I was really interested in, I think it's moving in the right direction, it's interesting, is really making sure that she connects with organizations that build out for commercial use. Building these stands and things, if they don't meet commercial specs, sometimes our specs for things that we're doing for ourselves are one thing. But when we start to put that in public spaces, like not even just at like the farmers market and things, but putting them as displays in public spaces, that that comes with a whole different set of requirements for public life safety code reasons. So really connecting with those traditional organizations that build out commercial display cases would be a great place for her to connect, to make sure that she's building out her own work that is meeting those specs that are required. And just as a curiosity, really wanting to see what the learning curve was for the equipment, because that learning curve for her would also impact how fast she can move toward actual production work. One question I have is that if her approach to community engagement has really been passive in the past, what's going to be her new approach to actually looking at how to work with community as she's moving forward? That really spending some time, sorry, we just got a lot going on. That really spending some time, so it seemed to me like a kind of an overall tone, and this is okay, is that so much of their approach was more of a transactional nature between her and community, and that's not necessarily right or wrong, but just really think about if it's just an exchange of here's my product, here's your money, here's your give me your money, then that in and of itself can create a barrier for how you can grow your base in regards to people who are going to support your work as it moves forward. That really, again, there's typically a lot of community work that's happening in communities, and always look at how does your work function as a builder of social capital, social entrepreneurship. Where in your community do we see community development work happening, and how can you then work with those particular organizations to expand your base beyond those who don't necessarily always come into art spaces, but who are also supportive of artists. And those are my primary points.
Thank you very much. So Ramiro was supposed to be our second reader on this application. However, we'll now open it up to the entire panel for new, additional, or opposing comments on Andrea Light's application.
Lauren here. Can you hear me? Yes? Yes, okay, great. This was a pretty straightforward application. I really enjoyed the thoughtfulness that was put into each of the responses. I'm curious to know if the applicant is at all reflecting upon any data metrics that they may be able to gain from social media, from website, that will help to inform potential audience engagements as they're looking to expand outside of the current sort of environment. The laser cutter, I'm always curious to know to what extent folks did the necessary research to either look at the various range of technology that exists out there, right? As well as pre-owned versus new, which might be able to help with keeping some costs down. So I'm familiar with Glowforge because we're in the process of purchasing a laser cutter ourselves here on campus, and I found that those costs were a little bit too excessive, and I didn't really, I thought some of the reviews just made me a little skeptical on the product. I have a comment here about online platforms, but I don't remember what it connected it to. Just a quick comment around engagement. I think it's, unless it was a explicit output for receiving funding around community engagement, I think it's quite fine for an artist to say, I'm really interested in working in the studio and producing objects and artworks for for public consumption, for purchase, and their practice may not have a deep community engagement component. And that became very clear to me that there was not a very strong community engagement component. I come from the position where I think it's okay, but it's always important to be reflective and to think about it in the course of producing a body of work or engaging folks. So I'm not offended by the sort of lack of articulation around how the applicant may engage community, but it should, I would hope that they would give it a bit more consideration and thought as just part of an exercise. That's it.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Any more comments, new, additional, or opposing on Andrew's application?
Hey, it's Matt. I agree with Lauren. One thing though that I did note is the applicant said at one point, I currently connect my work with others through passively showing art at a gallery space and maintaining a limited presence on social media. I plan to change this, but there was no steps indicated, no specifics. So I think, to your point, Lauren, creating and knowing the intended audience for that creative work, that's really important. And I think as community engagement goes, if nothing else, this is the closest thing the artist might have, the applicant might have to a business plan or an outreach plan, and that's going to be essential to them moving forward. So I highly recommend adding some specific steps in place to show what the plan is to engage both audience and the community in general.
Awesome, thank you.
I remember my one last thought, sorry.
Sure, yeah.
In reference to online platforms, I didn't see any reference to whether or not the applicant is using Etsy or any other sort of online, marketplace as a vehicle to selling and promoting their artworks. Thanks, Mike, for bringing up that part about social media. I mean, I think it's critical that artists and the creative sector in general really embrace social media, and so I'm happy to see that they are self-reflective in sort of the current state of their social media use, and that they plan to ramp it up, which I think it's free publicity, and I would hope that they really dive deep in the world of Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Any last comments, new or opposing, for Andrea Light's application? All right. Please finalize your comments in the online system here. We'll give you a few seconds to do that. Our next application, if you want to pull it up, is Brian Dortmund. We'll get started with that one in a few seconds. righty. Let's go ahead with Brian Dortmund's application. Our first reader is Julie Hill.
Yeah, I thought the application of $2,000 to a website seemed to me very reasonable and doable, especially if there isn't a website in existence. And I was very impressed with his community work, and overall, I think these small bites of small steps, taking one step at a time, is the kind of thing that I think is the most doable. I like the project. My only concern was I would prefer to see some type of really concrete community engagement on how he will direct people to his website other than contacts that he already has. That's the only comments I had.
Awesome, thank you, Julie. Maria was supposed to be our second reader, so we'll open the floor up to any new, additional, or opposing comments from the entire panel.
I really appreciate, like you said, the goal here. From a presentation standpoint, I think there was an emphasis in this application of almost mythologizing their own work, and not enough steps focused on how this will come to fruition, what the impact will be. There was, where is it? I think you had mentioned about the how are you connecting with people. A web project, and having gone through this multiple times, web projects require extensive infrastructure when they're about connecting people, and there are several existing low-cost websites that don't necessarily require, website platforms that don't require necessarily a complete ground-up build. And so this seemed like a really great first attempt at that, but not nearly enough grounded steps that are rooted in the present and the resources available to the applicant to make this as successful as we would like to see. So looking at what resources might be available, whether that's Squarespace, Wix, etc. Looking at on the equipment side, looking at what is the best equipment to allow the artist to scale in this way. Those practical things in here are listed with a lot of assumptions that aren't necessarily wrong, but they might not necessarily be the most cost effective and beneficial in the long term.
Awesome,
Yeah, I
thank
would
you.
agree. That was a lot of my comments about going back, and I listed for him quite a few resources to build out his website, for just even like using buying the domain name from GoDaddy. You can buy 2 years of that if you went through Namecheap, because it's only $10 there. So really explaining how can he take the resources he has, do some research so that he can amplify them over more years, because even the web hosting is almost double / triple what that web hosting will cost for one, if you were to do that with like Wix or some of the other organizations. So just really trying to get him to think about how to research where to spend his pennies so that he can get the biggest bang for the buck.
Thank you. Any other additional comments for Brian's application?
Yeah, just want to again reiterate with what Mike and Lashana just mentioned around looking at alternative platforms for websites. I think we live in a time where we are empowered by the whole range of resources and affordability that exists out there in the interwebs. And so, you know, I would hope that in sort of maintaining the website moving forward, that the applicant will dig deep into the sort of background dashboard as a way to sustain it. So ongoing sustainability is a question for me. Also looking at the whole range of Apple laptops that are available through the Apple Store. Again, this idea of, you know, buying pre-owned or the low tier laptop and then scaling up, as Mike had mentioned, I think could be another way of sort of just, you know, saving some pennies and thinking about what sometimes, you know, when you buy a laptop, it's too much power. So I don't quite have a full awareness of the actual needs. And the budget, you know, when we think about website, it's not only, you know, the structure, the framework, you know, making sure that our, you know, our logos, our branding and stuff are on point, but also, you know, it would have been, I don't know if the applicant is looking for archival photography as a way to really help promote and share their work in the best way possible. And so looking at some of these alternative ways that can really sort of enhance the website website offering. So yeah, just reiterating what was already said.
Awesome, thank you. These are great comments. Are there any more for Brian's application? All right. Let's finalize our comments in the online system then for Brian's application. We'll do that for a few seconds here. Our next application will be Cassidy Young. If you would like to pull up that application on your system. All right, does anybody need more time? Okay, I see you, I see you. You know, all the time, well, sort of. Sort of all the time in the world. All right, thumbs up if you're good. Ah, beautiful, okay. Let's move on to Cassidy Young's application. Our first reader is Lauren.
Okay. I really enjoyed reading this application. I thought it was a well-articulated project plan. I did get a bit confused and stumped just reading about the creative practice. I'm really interested in better understanding the influences and mentors, mentees, et cetera, that may have influenced or informed the artist's work. And so I felt like a bit of that sort of breath was missing for me, and just sort of better understanding the artist. But I thought that it left a lot of content for the applicant to sort of go back and maybe do some revisioning or reevaluation of what their exactly their artistic practice encompasses. There was some use of some words that left me, again, a bit confused, just trying to better understand the way in which the artist sees themselves in the art and culture ecosystem, or maybe the architectural, the urban planning. There were some words there that I think could be better articulated with less jargony terms. Again, a pretty straightforward use of potential funding around enhancing their sort of artwork object output packaging. Again, looking at point of sale systems, there's a lot out there. I would hope that the applicant would explore the whole range, the whole suite range that exists out there. I felt that the articulation around the ways in which they may develop new audiences left me just wanting to know a bit more about how and where they're thinking in that way.
I wonder, they mentioned sort of working with a local framer. I wonder if it might make, well, you know, supporting local and buying local, I think is incredibly important, but we all live in this world on a budget, and maybe looking at some online framing sites, which might be an alternative option in helping to stretch budget. Speaking a little bit about the community engagement, would have liked to see really sort of how their work in communities with a particular stakeholder is mutually beneficial, just really sort of lacking some of that sort of more critical thinking and articulation. Let me see. I would suggest exploring more innovative approaches to promotional objects that might give the applicant a more competitive edge. I think that their budget as outlined in some of the outputs that they are hoping to accomplish may exceed that 4,700. Let me see. Hold on, let me just read my notes here. Yeah. Otherwise, it's like I mentioned, it was a really well articulated project plan. You know, I always lean, you know, being more ambitious than most conservative folks, but it seems like it's quite doable.
Awesome, thank you, Lauren. Our next reader on Cassidy's application is Lysandra. Can you not hear us?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, let me swag back over, sorry. I agree with Lauren. I think one of the things that I found that she would really benefit from is to really sit down and rethink what is community engagement. With the type of work she does, even thinking about where do you see caricature artists show up, or spaces and places that she can show up to do this work. So where are places in her community where there are community events, where there's large masses of people that you can participate in? And so lots of, I mean, I'm thinking like back to school events, community block parties. There are all these like ways in which community exists, which the reality is the vast majority of community exists outside of the art world. So really looking at how can you connect with that active body of community to connect your work in, especially with the sketch work that she does, because that could be a huge opportunity for her in regards to generating income for her own artistic practice, as well as building additional relationships in the community that expands her art base. But really thinking about also alternative spaces, places to show your work. Lots of people like watercolors, and so how does your work, especially down in the Bloomington community, which has much more flexibility than some of the others, can your work be displayed in some of the restaurants and sold out of there? Can you create a relationship with some of the restaurant owners to display your work there? The same for coffee houses and church and faith-based organizations. What type of spaces in the context of your community does your particular practice of doing the sketching create opportunities for you, as well as different places to actually showcase the work that's not always just adhered to traditional art environments, because there's so much more of the world to be connected to. In general, and this is actually a comment I've put for every single person, is to really think about how does the internet pretty much makes your audience limitless. And this whole idea of Indiana being the crossroads of America, if you use Indianapolis as the starting point, you literally within 5 hours are able to connect with up to 10 different community markets. We're talking about Chicago, Cincinnati, Louisville, Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Lexington, Pittsburgh, Nashville, and Milwaukee. And those, especially with the particular type of work that she's doing, those are all spaces and places that you can look at how to expand your work. So not necessarily for this particular grant, but thinking about what you set up in this grant is the next path to how you can look at how to connect with those other communities to expand your base. That's all.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for those comments. Now it's open to everybody. New, additional, or opposing comments from the panel as a whole? All right, seeing none, we'll finish up our comments in the online system. We'll do a few seconds for that. While you're doing that, our next application will be Dawn England Harless. So you can pull that up as well. All right, so does anybody need more time on their comments or pulling the application up? Doesn't look like it, so we'll head on to Dawn England Harless's application. The first reader is supposed to be Ramiro, so we'll move to second reader, which is Matt McClure. You are on, Matt.
Thank you. There's a lot of passion in the writing of this application, but the goals seem to be very confusing. I noted that the artist appears to want to, in the narrative, want to be a full-time professional artist, or I should say, I'm confused in the writing. Excuse me. I'm confused in the writing if the artist does want to be a professional full-time artist and focus on the actual the craft and the business side of it, or is it a creator for the joy and validation of one's work? Neither of which are good or bad. It's just the goal, and it seemed to be very unclear. The narrative largely focused on the creative and exhibition elements, but not business. And mentoring is great, but a business plan is completely different. So I'm very confused by this application. There's, like I said, there's a lot of enthusiasm here, but what the actual goals were, I could not quite understand. So I do recommend that the applicant potentially reassess the language they use in defining their goal, so that it makes so that it's very clear, and that those goals are attainable, not just passion driven. Again, going back to feasibility, I had one question, and it was really beyond the life of this grant. Where will the revenue come from? What are the annual monthly expenses? And that's if this is business focused, if it's professional practice focused. So if those goals can be honed and more specific and clear, I think the other elements of this grant will easily fall into place, because they'll be able to articulate those things much better. Right now, it's just a lot of enthusiasm that needs some extensive clarification.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. We'll open it up now to any new or additional comments from the entire panel.
One comment I had for her, especially on this desire to curate a show, was to just to kind of take a step back and understand it's a little bit more easier than that, and that she can simply start this by process of practicing curation by creating her own spaces to create a space. That renting out a community hall, renting out a ballroom at a hotel, these are all places that she can start to practice this process of what does it mean to curate. because curating is less about how to hang. I mean, hanging is important, but it's also about how do you create the story, the theme. All of that is important, and she can start that on her own. And I would just, because mentors and others don't necessarily arrive on time on your time schedule, but you can start this process herself of looking at how to go through this. And I would just really encourage her to start looking at how to move toward this notion of wanting to curate a show, that not to just wait around for the next year to do it, but to actually start looking at going through the process of figuring out just how to do it and taking a step out there to do it. That's all I got.
That's great. Thank you so much. What else on Dawn England Harless's application from the entire panel?
Sure, Lauren here. I also appreciate the passion in this application, and like Mike and LaShonda, am a bit perplexed or confused about what the real sort of goal or direction or interest is. Is it in creating a new body of work, which will then give the applicant an opportunity to package a new portfolio as an opportunity to reach out to independent curators or alternative or traditional gallery spaces? Or is there a real interest in curating a show? While I, support folks who are always interested in curatorial studies, I don't know how I feel or what their real thoughts are around curating a show of your own body of work. I think that there is an opportunity to if there is an opportunity to work with a curator or a space that has a curatorial focus, it provides a bit more criticality and removes the artist from sort of it gives the artist an opportunity to step back and to sort of really sort of see what the curatorial process can look like. I think that, the applicant should consider using some of the funds to either take an online curatorial studies class or to purchase some really sort of fundamental, foundational curatorial studies books, and to sort of get a better understanding of what that process is outside of the physical labor part of curating. Attending, and there's a lot of free activities, outside of purchasing books and taking non-traditional classes, attending curator lectures, going to gallery curator-led gallery walks, really an opportunity to explore the space, explore the way in which the artwork is interacting with the environment, which I think can be incredibly helpful. And let me see what else I wanted to see here. I think that it's clear that the applicant is thinking about engagement and the importance of engagement. Some of the responses were a little bit repetitive, so I can't really speak confidently about that. But ultimately, it's just, I'm not quite sure of what the real interest is. I mean, I think it's important, like I said, to use potential funding and time to create a new body of work, which is a major endeavor. And the curatorial studies can be sort of a side, sort of, in personal, independent research, professional development opportunity. Going on YouTube, there's amazing conversations that the applicant can use as an opportunity to sort of build knowledge base without having to interact with a curator necessarily. So that's it.
Thank you, Lauren. Any last comments on Dawn England Harless's application?
This is Julie Hill, and I wanted to reiterate the issue about the curating the show. There are so many places to start small. You don't have to go right into a gallery right off. Visiting curated shows, visiting museums, galleries, coffee shops, all those places, and looking at how art is exhibited is a really good way to kind of wrap your head around how your work will fit into an environment. If the space really kind of dictates that, so having a space in mind might help. the other thing that really jumped out with me is her passion about, finding and working with overlooked objects. And so when it came to community engagement, I just thought it would be a really nice match to maybe work with overlooked populations and try to marry those two passions in some ways, and to I always try to think with artists to try to come up with some type of small, doable little art project of that can be used to engage audiences, to give them some type of real hands-on experience of your work, and then maybe have your artwork, a small display of what your work is, will help generate an experience that people can take away with them, that you might be able to craft and make a little bit better along the way every time you try it before you actually do an opening, some type of opening at a gallery.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. Any other last comments on Dawn's application before moving on? All right, looks like we'll move on from Dawn's application. Let's finalize our comments in the online system. While you're doing that, our next application is Fernando Lozano. That will be an application you can pull up right now as well. Does anybody need more time on their comments? All right. Then we will go ahead and get started on the application for Fernando Lozano. And Maria is our first reader, so we'll move to our second reader, which is Lauren.
All right. Again, I really appreciate the applicant's passion in the application and their desire to elevate their practice. However, I really feel that I really want Fernando to go back and reread his creative artistic statement, because as a curator, as an arts administrator myself, after reading it several times, I'm not very confident in being able to articulate this Fernando as an artist and exactly what he's how his work has evolved. But I think there's some really good content there, and I would just suggest that they really go back to sort of give it another critical review, because I think what we don't want is for the reader or the viewer to be able to have to like cobble together a sense of what the artist is trying to project, right? There are a couple of words that I think needs just a bit more unpacking around their creative endeavors, their business goals. So I would like to see just a bit more clarity, and clarity in a condensed way. I think could be quite helpful for Fernando. But I did really enjoy reading what propels artists, this particular applicant, to do what they do, and how their life experiences have impacted their work. I do have a couple of comments here. Let me just go back to this. So I think that in the application, just some general comments around the budget. Wasn't quite sure if the projected budget reflected any additional software that is required for the purchase of the new technology. I think that as creatives, if we really leverage and use our computers, then we should make every effort to work with the most relevant and current. So I totally support him in wanting to get the very best tech. But just want to make sure that the budget is accounting for the need for increased software. Again, I know I keep sort of beating this one, but looking again at pre-owned versus new. I know that he mentioned getting an iMac desktop. Maybe it's a better opportunity to look at a laptop, which gives him an opportunity to be more mobile with it. and then maybe purchase a large affordable screen if there's a need for him to work large scale, but really have the power that a laptop can provide. Might there be an opportunity for the artist to buy the computer through a nonprofit to save on tax? That might be an opportunity. Consider technology. Would need to get a better sense of what are the other programs required as Fernando's exploring some of this other sort of 3D technology. And, you know, I think it's, again, important for us to make investments in our technology and in our practice and professional learning. But if the debt seems a bit extreme, I think it calls for an opportunity to sort of stop and sort of do some additional research. So, you know, maybe looking at alternative technology routes might prevent the applicant from having to take on as much personal debt. And again, the laptop is one bit, but using the laptop to produce a new body of work or new objects, there wasn't any sort of conversation around what those production costs of those objects might be and how that new setup might impact his work. Hold on a second here. Would have liked to hear, read just a little bit more about how mutually beneficial some of these relationships are, just digging a little bit deeper. If there's any sort of, looking at the resume, clearly this applicant has done some work in the field. And so just having a better handle on how they see community, how they engage community would be helpful. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great. So since that was the second reader, we're going to open the application to any new, additional, or opposing comments from anybody on the panel. So let's hear it.
I guess I would like, this is Julie Hill.
Hi, Julie.
I so appreciate his social commentary. I love that aspect of art, and I guess I was glad to see that he was moving to Bloomington, but I'd like to see him, or I'm wondering as how is he connecting with community issues, with community organizations who have causes that they're you know, working towards. How, you know, I'd like to see him more actively involved in getting to those groups so he can partner with them maybe in a community art project, and where he is, how he's trying to develop partnerships that will help inform his projects. And by partnering, sometimes you can leverage more funding.
Thank you.
I also think that as he looks at the community work, there's definitely a need for him to develop skills in arts-based community development. Americans for the Arts has, I put it in his actual evaluation box, a great article to kind of help him think about how to bridge that gap between doing the artwork, but actually connecting it to community and doing it in a way that actually benefits whatever the quote unquote cause is that you're working toward. I have other resources for him in here, but really this is that realm of when you start to talk about what does it mean when you do work in community. And so really looking at things that are more grounded in social art practices, arts-based community development, doing some of the researching, some of the work through Animating Democracy's work. Those are all spaces to get started in regards to thinking about what does it mean to be an artist who works with community around social issues. And those are good places to start.
That's awesome. All right, so Matt, are you back with us?
I am.
Okay, perfect, great. Did you have any comments on this application? I wanted to give you a chance before we moved on.
No, I did not.
Perfect, thank you. So let's finalize our comments in the online system for Fernando Lozano. And the next application will be Gary Gee, if you want to pull that up as well. G, Gary G, that also works there.
Sure, you guys have a lot. I can empathize.
All right, does anybody need more time to open that application? All right, well, go ahead with it again for me, Anna. G. Gary G's application. Our first reader is Matt.
Thank you. I only a couple of comments here. I might be mistaken, but it seemed like the focus of this application is largely on attending a specific art show, an exhibition, or gathering, excuse me, and it seemed to be fine, but that the volume of goals around that are too many, and that they should really reassess what goals are essential and focus on one, maybe two. And then the only other comment I had was the applicant mentioned the Monday to Monday podcast as a way to as something to utilize and build off of. I'm very curious, based on that statement, what the data is behind the Monday to Monday podcast, audience reach, etc. And so I do recommend that the applicant, if possible, include some of that data in the application to back up that strategy.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. Ramiro was our second reader, so we'll open it up to any new additional or opposing comments from the entire panel.
Again, for me, this is one of those spaces and places where, as he does his community work, again, looking at social practice art paradigms become important, arts-based community development, all of that, again, starts to come at play here. The one thing I do think he should really consider as he goes down to Miami is to not sleep on making sure that he connects to the local art community, because that event is really not necessarily always focused on the local. And there are some really great local things going on. So to not, if you're going to spend time making the trip down there, to also spend some time going to see those alternative art spaces and community in Miami. Miami is rich with really diverse communities with lots of different cultural backgrounds that it would be a shame to go and not necessarily dive into being able to see those spaces as well. And in some ways, the type of artwork he does may actually make faster, larger connections.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments on Gary's application?
Lauren here. I really appreciate the applicant being very upfront with with cultivating their self-interest and expanding outside of their region and looking at other sort of high-profile blue chip art gatherings that happen nationally. I think is an amazing opportunity to not only share your work, but also get a better sense of how the arts and culture ecosystem works. And Art Basel is really sort of an anomaly, I think, because it's so, it's this commercial, it's this blend of commercial, emerging, established kind of pop-up, which really talks a lot about, right, gentrification and colonization in a particular area. So it may not provide as is critical of an opportunity in identifying spaces and people in which the applicant can really engage. You know, there are other art events regionally, right? Like Art Expo in Chicago, like the other art fair in Chicago, which are also, you know, opportunities to touch folks, many folks who may be, you know, interacting and engaging in Miami. So my point is I really feel like the budget is a bit bloated in terms of, you know, the what the applicant is really trying to get out of it. You know, if a portion of the budget was dedicated to creating a portfolio or new business cards or something for distribution, right? I didn't see any of that in there, so I don't know how in which the applicant is working on acquisition of gallery spaces and curatorial interest or interacting with other artists. I think a budget of $2,500 would really, if stretched appropriately and looking at alternative methods of lodging and travel, the applicant would be able to touch a few other events that are happening regionally. I think that might be much more impactful and much, because it's an incredibly competitive system that exists in Art Basel, and incredibly siloed. And so I think that the goal would be to try to find viable spaces and opportunities for the artists to share their work. I also, what do I have in here? And so maybe rethinking the way in which the funds will be used and maybe spreading that across 2 to 3 research trips might be a better opportunity. Or even just like a weekend in Chicago and hitting up, you know, a bunch of gallery spaces and museum spaces, I think can be just as powerful as going down to Art Basel. But I agree with LaShonda. I didn't really get a sense of, outside of Art Basel, what are the other spaces and places and folks that the applicant would like to engage. Amazing, it's you know, incredibly art rich, culturally rich down in Miami. There's a lot of sort of subculture activity that's happening on there that could be, you know, really powerful for the artist. So really, you know, if they're going to go to Art Basel, that's fantastic, that's great, but really sort of maximize the time as much as possible, and maybe look at some Airbnbs, you know, as a way to stretch the funds so that they can pay for museum admissions. But if they go to Art Basel, you know, great, and just really make the most of it.
That's awesome. LaShonda, did you have something else?
No, just kind of piggyback on Lauren again, because I think sometimes when we've been in the art world, we've already been like beaten up enough to be like, okay, not do this. But I think sometimes people have to go places like that so that they can have a reset and really kind of understand what it is. And I think just having just having encountered just a lot of budding artists, especially lately in Indianapolis, that there is a desire to go to these places because Indianapolis is a smaller art community. And I've always found that when they make the travel, that then they have a different perspective. That's all.
That's a great comment. Thank you. Any more comments from the entire panel on Gary's application? All right, seeing none, we should move forward. Let's finalize our comments in the online system.
Okay, and does anyone, we're about a little over halfway through. Does anybody need to take a break? Maybe a 5-minute break. Okay, we'll do it. 12:50, which is 11:50 your time, right? So 12:50, we'll be back here. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. We'll probably get started here in a minute if everybody wants to get back on. We should wait for one, right?
Hey, I'm gonna have to probably call in. For some reason, my power is not charging, so I'm gonna have to switch to another device. So I'm gonna.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
wait for it. Julie, are you still there? All right, let's see, we lost Julie. We'll wait for Matt to call back in and we'll get started here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, we got you, Matt.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
You're fine. I think we're gonna try to get Julie back here. All right, Julie's almost back on the line. Just so everybody knows where we're at Kayla Austin is the next grant application, or the fellowship application we will review. Wow, okay. And our first reader will be LaShonda. Let's just hold off for one more minute until we get Julie back in here.
Hey, Julie.
Julie, is that you? I think it's Julie. Okay, cool. All right, so we have everybody back online. We are going to start with Kayla Austin's application. And LaShondra, it is all you, first reader.
Of course you say that because now I done messed my finger up.
You're fine, take your time.
Yeah, I don't, usually I'm much better with this whole tech thing, so I don't know what's going on. You just gotta help me. Okay. I think in general, she's headed in the right direction and how she's thinking about this, which is important. Because really what she's working toward is more also doing social practice art and working in community, and that's just a whole different level of things that are going to be required as she moves forward. One artist that I really wanted her to check out in an organization in Philadelphia is called the People's Paper Co-op, and specifically an artist named Faith Bartley, whose work is all about how do you use paper to work in community. Paper making in particular. Faith's work is about working with formerly incarcerated individuals. And so I think her doing research with these organizations that specifically use paper as a way to work in community around transformation is important, as it will help her think about it beyond quote unquote low income communities. Because that can mean a lot of things, and just coming from a community development side, you could do a lot of damage or you could do a lot of good. So spending some time really thinking about, again, like what does community development mean? How do you work within context of collective impact and community development paradigms? I know she's relocating back to Indianapolis. So she's listed some organizations that she wants to connect with. And I would again push to think about, I know many of these organizations, but again, and I've listed others for her in the evaluation, but to really think about, because many of those organizations also are also kind of the quote unquote status quo organizations that are doing alternative community development work, but there's really lots that's going on. So really thinking about spending more time doing some quote unquote field research to see where are those spaces and places where the work that you would like to do is going to be impactful in the communities that you want to work in, and really spending time thinking about what is the community. Because you can do this with sexually trafficked girls, which I have a student who does this. You could do this, but to say that you're just going to work in quote unquote low income communities, I was really curious as to what that meant. So are you just going to roll up into the middle of an apartment complex and start making paper? Or are you going to try to work within what's going on? Because on the east side of Indy is a huge initiative about building a community art center to work with many of the apartment communities through the Glick Foundation. So really spending that time to understand what is the rhythm of what's happening in Indy in regards to community, so she can figure out how to be connected with that. Again, because as you step into community, you are stepping into some other things, spending some time, again, doing this work around trauma-informed community development, trauma-informed community building. And what does that mean? Because when we talk about working in quote-unquote low-income communities, we're also talking about working in communities oftentimes they're experiencing other forms of stress, like lack of access to food, lack of access to transportation. And so how your project is able to be successful and support the actual community and it not be viewed as a parachute project is oftentimes really connected to how you think about how you walk into those spaces. And so just spending some time. An organization that I think would be helpful for her to connect here is the Flanner House Community Writing Center. It is developed by Marian University, but it is really about how do we use the writing arts to actually support the work in community in the middle of community. And that is a good place, working with Mark Latta and some of them, to really think about how do you enter community to do this particular type of work. But also, again, the People's Paper Co-op in Philadelphia and Faith Bartley's work in general, I think would be really good things for her to connect with. Yeah, I've already talked about, I've listed quite a few other organizations to work that she could connect with: Harrison Center for the Arts, the Learning Tree, Grow Inc., Indy Convergence, Reconnecting to Our Waterways, Indy Park, specifically Riverside Park and Aspire House, are places where these are organizations working at the grassroots community level in many ways that she can look at how to partner with them to help her broaden her scope about where she can go as she chooses to relocate back to Indianapolis. I think it's great that she's found the Women's Studio Workshop to take her child with her. That's oftentimes a huge barrier for people to be able to go to these workshops when they have children. And so that's kind of my overall most important things to say.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Julia, you're up as second reader on Kayla's application.
Julie, you're muted, so I'm going to try to manually unmute you, but you should be able to mute and unmute by yourself.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Sorry
Okay,
about that.
sorry. I loved Kayla's project. I love the mobility aspect of it, given that we need the rural engagement. Indianapolis is centrally located. As LaShonda said, that it's only, you know, an hour or two, and she could reach some of those rural areas that so need the arts engagement. I wanted Kayla, though, to think about broadening her net of target audience outside of the low-income people. I mean, paper making, I've done it a lot with older people. It's a wonderful activity for people with dementia. And I just think it has lots of different applications for lots of different populations. I kept seeing her cart at the farmer's market and talking about, you know, food and using leftover produce for making the paper. So I loved her focus. I loved the involvement with the children. I think that could add another intergenerational component to the engagement. And overall, I think I liked her proposal so much because I see a lack overall in a lot of the other participants in this social practice art experience. And I know not everybody's into that, but I just feel like there's this missing opportunity to actually engage people in the process of making, because I think that overall generates an appreciation for the arts when you can engage people in the process, even if they're not going to be, you know, professional artists. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. All right, now we will open it up to all the panelists. Any new, additional, or opposing comments on Kayla's application?
Lauren here. I would recommend that Kayla look into the work that William Estrada is doing in Chicago with his mobile street art cart, essentially fabricating a mobile unit which goes into Black and Brown communities in the south and west side of Chicago, as well as working with institutions as pop-up sort of experiential type activities. He was able to do fabricate essentially this mobile unit with some crowdsourcing funds, but is really providing an invaluable resource to specific neighborhoods in Chicago. What I did have a question just in terms of the community engagement component is, it sounds like there is a focus in African American communities, but might there be an opportunity for some of the you know, bridge making work, some of the thinking more broadly at, you know, one community being a pathway into other communities, and thinking about the ways in which Kayla may interact or engage with Latinx Spanish-speaking communities. I think there should be some thought about that, which I think you know, will inevitably come up, right? And in reading, I forget which component it was, but I don't exactly know what she means by murals being cheap, maybe in the way in which she's been facilitating murals, but just being really careful around how the value connected to mural making is projected, both as she's speaking publicly about it, but also in applications. So I took a little issue with that and would hope that they would sort of rethink the way in which they project the mural making process as a really invaluable component to placemaking and placekeeping and place sharing and storytelling, et cetera. So that's it.
Awesome, thanks, Lauren. Any more comments on Kayla's application? All right, let's finish up our comments then on the online system. We will move to Christina Nowski up next, so we can pull that application up. All right, does anybody need more time to pull that application up? All right, looks like we can go ahead and get started then. So we will start with the application from Christina Nowski. Lauren, you are up as our first reader.
All right. Again, another pretty straightforward, well-articulated application. I appreciate Kayla being very self-reflective throughout the application, and it really expresses with her level of detail, not too much detail, but just enough detail, and sort of offering some anecdotes and reflections on her practice. I really feel that there is not only some competency behind the proposed project, but that she's also open and adaptable to the ways in which she needs to adjust her work and thinking about community. Overall, looking to enhance some of
really hot out there right now.
Whoops, I can hear you. Is it really hot out there?
Wait, what?
Yeah, I heard some background noise. Someone said it's really hot out there.
Oh, okay.
Well, where was I? Essentially, you know, the items outlined in her timeline and the proposed projects really will work to increase efficiency and competency from an online perspective as well as a production perspective. I thought she had a really well presented creative work description. I enjoyed reading it. Might be helpful to sort of think about some of the real intersectionalities of her artistic practice and her sort of more global issues, and maybe digging deep into sort of a STEAM approach. How does that sort of impact her work? Again, she appears very resourceful in exploring all means of support. I would recommend, just given the quality and the intentionality with her application, that she explore some other forms of professional development through other granting, other fellowships that will help her to sort of elevate her work. Again, looking at some other online opportunities, maybe exploring, you know, other websites. I think Mike had mentioned Squarespace earlier. You know, they have some competitive opportunities that might help to sort of lessen the burden of the budget a bit to sort of move some of those funds in other areas. And I would just really encourage Christina to look more broadly at some other granting opportunities. I really enjoyed her application.
Awesome, thank you. Maria was supposed to be second reader, so we are moving to the full panel discussion. Also, just so you know, there's like something happening right outside our window, so if you hear a lot of background noise, we apologize. But any new, additional, or opposing comments are now welcome.
I would say that I support what Lauren's talking about. What I really think, especially with her community, the application is definitely heading the right direction, but that for her to really start thinking about what are organizations that are mission aligned but are community based, because really connecting with places, especially with the type of work she has, like the National Wildlife Association, Audubon Society, Indiana Forest Alliance, the Indianapolis Zoo, that those are spaces that you have a built-in community that is going to appreciate the work and expand your offerings and your opportunities. Like even thinking about how do you work with the park districts in your communities, that these are all places that are not necessarily connected to the art world, but which your artwork will be appreciated, and you expand your audience, your community connections, which expands everything else over time. And so just to really dig in and think about more from less from an artist perspective, but more from a collective impact model that is really about what is the gift, skill, and talent I bring to the table on this discussion about extinct birds. And that's your art. And so who are other people who appreciate that conversation and bring your gifts to that table and see how it grows from there. Again, the stuff with the website's always interesting. The only thing I can really say is that it's really important that if you build it yourself or you get someone else to build it, that you make sure you know how to maintain it yourself, because it's not the building that becomes the issue, it's the maintenance. And oftentimes I've seen recently artists get into a conundrum because they have someone build it for them, but they themselves don't know how to keep it updated. So just being mindful of whatever direction she chooses to head, whether she chooses to build it herself with Wix, Forescape, or any of those, or get someone else to do it, being mindful that she still needs to, for feasibility and be able to maintain it over time, do it herself. And in her application, I listed other places for her to expand her, like again, I've told all of them, think about what does it mean for you to drive 3 to 4 hours and what are all the communities that your art is attached to, but also giving her other websites to look for opportunities for exhibitions such as collegeart.org, call for entries, the NIFA. Those are just a few places to get started to find other spaces to exhibit your work. That's all.
Thank you. Any more comments on Christina's application?
I have one comment, and it's more structural from their narrative standpoint. There is the early parts of the narrative largely focus on the individual and their point of view. I think this is fine, but in grant writing, brevity does help, and being clear does help, and it also helps the artist understand exactly what the focus is. And so really tightening that narrative up to be largely focused on the challenges and goals and the steps being taken to achieve those goals, I think it would go a long way. And in regard to the goals, even with the community engagement, laying down some more precise steps as to how to achieve the specific engagement goals. Again, that I think will go a long way in helping achieve those goals. So,
thanks, Matt. All right. So, are there any more comments on Christina's application before we move forward?
Okay, great. Now that we're just getting up toward the end of our time allotted here, just want to remind everybody to keep your comments succinct. You know, say what you need to say, but you don't need to reiterate anything that's already been said. So we'll blaze through these last 3 while still giving them a really thorough, helpful feedback. Okay? Thank you. All
right. So next up is Madison Miller. Our first reader was Ramiro, so we moved to second reader, which is Ashanda. It's all yours, Ashanda. Whenever you get there, it's all right.
Just give me a second.
No problem.
Okay, yeah. I think, again, headed in the right direction. One thing that I think really needs to be mindful of is just being very mindful of how you're entering communities so that relationship does not look exploitive as you're doing your quote-unquote research, because how you enter community, artists oftentimes, as just a social practice artist, definitely get accused of doing kind of flash in the pan, drop-in projects. We don't get things that are, community doesn't get to participate in the benefit of what happens after. So just being very mindful that as the artist, as she begins to work in community, to really think about what does it mean to enter community as a partner, and not from the viewpoint of I'm doing research, because that is a thin line to walk and can do more damage than good. And if it's done well, it can actually build a base for you to grow from and create long-term and lifetime relationships where your work is supporting that community and vice versa. I've listed in here, I'm not going to go through it, but a whole list of artists and organizations locally and nationally that can be a way for her to think about this, as well as her own work grows, again, doing work around understanding arts-based community development, creative placemaking practices, social practice art paradigms, that these become crucial as she moves forward to grow as an artist and continue to move toward working in community. Yeah, those are the main points, just to keep it brief. But I think
Thank you very much. All right, that was our second reader. So any new additional or opposing comments from the rest of the panel? All right.
You sure? Anything else? Would love another comment maybe for Maddie. Anything really strong that you saw in the application?
Okay, this is Julie. I had one more comment for Madison. I just kind of feel like, again, what was said is I encourage her to think about how the people she's working with, the neighbors that she's working with, how they can inform her process, and not so much how she's informing her art making and asking them to respond to it, but actually engaging them in the help and process of informing how the art is made.
Great, thank you, Julie. Any others last for Madison Miller? All right, let's move on then. Finalize your comments in the online system, and we will begin with Megan Jefferson. Let's pull that application up here. In just a second, Matt, you'll be our second reader because Maria was our first reader. So whenever you get to that application, Matt, you may begin.
Thank you. One moment.
No problem.
Okay. For that delay. So this application, I think, conceptually is strong, but the goals seem locational focused and don't really seem to connect with a clear path as to how to achieve the applicant goals. And so I think I do recommend the applicant may want to rewrite with an emphasis on more of the practical steps needed to achieve those goals outside of just learning new techniques. Often there is a tendency, and especially here, to have if I create this, people will come, or this thing will happen, but not enough clear steps as to how that can be achieved. So this, I think, is a case of that. And so really, I would recommend just rewriting that goal section with emphasis on the practical and the specific steps that will line up. And this is more so the grant as a whole, even with community engagement. The more specifics needed, how portion of the grant, those specifics will greatly affect and positively impact, I think, the outcome of this grant. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Other additional comments on Megan Jefferson's application? LaShonda?
Yeah, just more on the community engagement front, to really, again, because of the nature of the work, really look for organizations outside of the art world, community-based, nonprofits, whatever, that are mission aligned, because really looking at how this work can connect to the larger health and wellness fields, holistic medicine, conservation, ecology, are ways for her, again, to connect to a larger community that will help her figure out, by working with these organizations, what does it mean for her community engagement, but to really push outside of just trying to do the work in the context of the art world, because the themes that it's working with are much more greater, and there is a huge world out there to be connected with. For all of the artists here that are kind of doing work that is nature-based, I would really suggest that they look at the National Parks Artists in Residence program as well, as another way to expand their work and think about how their work exists in the greater context of dealing with artwork in the natural world.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Any last comments on Megan Jefferson's application? All right. Let's finish up our comments on that application and move towards our last one, number 12, Stephanie Mcdermott. Julie, you'll be the first one on this application to read. So whenever you get to that application, if you want to start us off, we will begin on your cue.
Now, okay, now can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Very much like this applicant. I think she's got a really cool project going on here. I see it so useful in engaging with other holistic practitioners and really promoting the breath work. And one of the best ways I could see this practical application of art and holistic healing. And I think she kind of identifies that, but just really focusing on encouraging, like in her art exhibit, to have those holistic practitioners there in some way to help really capitalize on the dual marketing efforts. Yeah, I think that.
All right. Is that all, Julie?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Julie. Lauren, you are the lucky winner who gets to take us home on this one. So what do you got to say about Stephanie?
All right, I'll keep it short. I found this to be a really interesting read, a bit wordy, but otherwise, the information is there. I would suggest, as I looked at the budget and her desire to sort of revamp website and look differently at the way in which she projects online, might there be an opportunity to do logo building through Canva or the Noun project or through Squarespace as a way to keep some initial costs down? So, highly suggest that, she review the budget. Just a bit on the community engagement. I think that this is an opportunity for Stephanie to really silo bust, and as LaShonda has been sort of mentioning, an opportunity to engage more mission-aligned organizations and institutions out there as a way to tap into new audiences and really look more broadly at the way in which her practice and her work is making bigger impacts and contributions to the multidisciplinary fields that it seems like she is engaging. But otherwise, I thought it was a pretty straightforward application. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. All right, last application, last chance to add your additional or opposing comments. LaShonda, I see you're unmuted there.
Yep, glad Lauren said what she did. Just something to, again, when you step outside that door, doing work around trauma-informed practices and things become so important, because I think she's headed down that path, but really doing more, and I've got the resources in here, really kind of really paying attention to that, because using words such as broken is kind of problematic in many aspects when you start working in community, and it's viewed more as a potential victimization of individuals versus looking at how do we understand the traumas people have experienced and use our processes to help people transform. So just really looking at those practices to understand how that informs your practice, and again, the language that you use, because many of those doors would be shut where this could be a powerful, like I said, I have a student that works with formerly sexually attracted girls, and to come in with that kind of language means that you wouldn't even be able to get through the door. And so just being very mindful of the impact of language as we try to work in communities with community members who are going through things. And some of that language is moving from trauma-informed to mean, what does it mean to do healing-centered work? So that's pretty much my main point.
That's really great feedback. Is there any other comments on Stephanie's application here? All right, if seeing none, we did it. We got through all 12. So that concludes our On-Ramp Fellowship 2019 Visual Arts Review Panel. Thank you for letting me facilitate this conversation, and I will turn it back over to Anna now for last comments.
Thank you, everyone. Excellent job. This officially concludes our public meeting, and so I'm going to ask our guests to leave us at this time, and everyone, all the other panelists, if you would hold on for just a moment.